all available all over the world. So, round of applause, please, for Defne Suman. Saras Manickam worked as a teacher, teacher trainer, copywriter, business English trainer, among many other things. She used to work on writing her short stories at night. Her various work experiences enabled insights into characters, while her life experiences shaped the authenticity of her stories. She won the 2017 D.K. Dutt Award for her story Charan. Some of her stories have appeared in Silverfish and readings anthologies, while one was shortlisted in the 2021 Masters Review Summer Short Story Award. She lives and works in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. A round of applause, please, for our second speaker. Now for the moderator, last but not the least, we have Antara Datta, who is an associate professor in the Faculty of English at Janki Devi Memorial College, University of Delhi, India. She has been awarded the prestigious Charles Wallace Fellowship from the Charles Wallace India Trust twice, once in 2001 and another time in 2006. Her academic interests include contemporary travel writing, post-colonial fiction, and politics. A very warm welcome to each one of you, and I would like to hand over proceedings now to the three ladies on stage. Thank you.
Good evening, Kolkata. Thank you, Coal India, Kolkata Literary Meet, and Malavika. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to be in conversation with two brilliant writers, absolutely fantastic writing, both of you. And just to add a little bit to the introduction that was just, read out. Defne lives in Athens with her two cats. Yes. So that detail, there is a husband too, but we shall not focus on that. So, I mean, you and I can actually have an entire session, 2-hour session on cats, but maybe another day. And Saras's book was selected by Pan Malaysia, and it was distributed to women in Malaysia for free, and so her work is very significant in Malaysia. So welcome Saras and welcome Defne. So just I'm going to the conversation will have 3 parts. I'm an academic, so I always work with a scheme. So so the first part will I'd request both of you to talk about the kind of histories that you're interested in. Defne, for instance, 2 of your novels are works of historical fiction, and Saras, you have a very deep interest in Malaysian colonial history and, of course, contemporary Malaysia. So just for the audience, if you could just tell us a little bit about which parts, of Turkish history are you looking at and why?
Well, thank you for the most difficult question at the beginning. I like history a lot, and I think we are, as individuals, are very much connected to history because we are connected to our grandparents. And so I find myself mostly interested in the times of my grandparents. It started as an attempt to understand their lives and seeing them as not like dede and nene, as we call it in Turkish, like some old, sweet people, but like as individuals who lived at their times. So it started with this, and my grandparents lived at the times of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, which was before my country, before Turkey. There was Ottoman Empire, and it was a big empire coming all the way to India, actually. And then it shrank, it became really small due to wars and everything, and it became today's Turkey. So that means the end of the empire and the foundation of Turkish Republic in its place. So how an empire dissolves, very similar actually the history of India, how a nation is constructed, is created from a multicultural, multilingual, multi-religious panorama, is reduced into what I call, not me, everybody calls it, nation state, is something that I'm interested, not because I'm a historian or a sociologist, but at the level of an individual. How does this my grandparents living with a lot of other languages spoken around them, Greek, Armenian, Ladino, which is the Jewish people, Sephardic Jews speaking in Istanbul, French, of course, back then, because everybody spoke French, Turkish, and other languages, and having all these religions around them, having a certain sort of identity and understanding of oneself and the other. And then my mother had another understanding of herself and the other because of the changes in the world, in the country, and then it comes down to me and the next generations. So I am always curious how history plays out in our own psyche, how it determines who I am, the times that I'm living in. So it all starts with an attempt to build a character who is the grandparent of another character, and then actually the Silence of Shehrazad, which takes place in the Ottoman Empire, the dissolvement of it, the end of it. It all started with me thinking about a grandmother for a character that I was writing, another book which I never wrote, because the grandmother was so interesting. So slowly I found myself writing more about her, and her name is Shehrazad. So then the book called The Silence of Shehrazad is born out of my curiosity about a grandmother.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll come to it.
Okay.
Saras?
I didn't think of any timeline. You know, the stories happened and they came and they got themselves fixed to a certain timeline. I think what the stories started, because they're all short stories, 14 stories, and they started as maybe a phrase that you hear, a word that you hear, a story, a news, this Indian man killed in jail, in prison after being taken in, and he dies within 2 hours. So these things just percolated in my mind. And when I started putting the collection together, then I found that there was this theme of resilience, of the politics of identity, of race, and because I come from Malaysia, so as you know, we have 3 main races and religions. And it just percolated and came together, the politics of race, religion, your name, your identity, everything, being a constant challenge in your life. And the need to be either resilient or to give in and weep. I didn't want to do a collection of weeping women. It's so boring. Absolutely. Yeah, so I just wanted women who kicked ass in the way that life threw them things, and then they took ownership of their lives. And that's how the thing came. Somehow they all came and everyone took ownership. You always have to pay a price for taking ownership of your life, especially if you're a woman. But they said, what the heck, we're going to do it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, though, both of you write in very different forms, like you have the long form, writing a historical fiction, and you're actually looking at, in The Silence of Shehrazad, it's almost 200 years or a little more, and At the Breakfast Table is almost 100 years. And you are writing a collection of short stories, like it's 14 short stories, but the commonalities are also there in terms of theme. One is, you have, At the Breakfast Table, for instance, is written from the perspective of 4 characters, and so is Silence. You have multiple perspectives, narratorial perspectives, and of course, your short stories are written from different perspectives as well. So, in that sense, I find that Malaysia is articulated from various points of view, and the history that you are trying to look at or excavate is also accessed through multiple characters. And And interestingly also, like for instance, you say, I think I read in one of your blogs, that you're interested in the silenced part of Turkish history, and you're trying to look at those aspects of Turkish history which do not really get discussed or are getting gradually erased from, say, public memory, because that's how, as you rightly said, nation states function. There is a dominant state narrative, and all other narratives will be disregarded or suppressed, but you are also writing from the perspective of minorities, the marginal voices which get suppressed. And in your writing as well, this is what I find, is that most of the stories are from the perspective of the Indian community over there. And just correct me if I'm wrong, but in Malaysia, of the three communities, I believe that the Indian community would be at the most disadvantaged.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So in that sense, I see that there are commonalities. Yeah. So would you like to talk a little bit about what made you choose this multiple narrative, the multiple narrators, in fact, in both your works?
Well, to begin with, I really love crowded novels. As a reader, it's one of my favorite things. Like when 100 Years of Solitude, or Thomas Mann, or like whoever has a big cast of characters. I love those novels, and I know for some people it's very confusing, but whenever I start reading, it's like Salman Rushdie, Midnight's Children, like so many people come and go, and you have to find your way among them as if you are walking. But it also gives you the opportunity to go into the women's lives in literature, because women usually live in crowded homes. So you have generations, you have children, especially when you're writing historical fiction. And if you want to talk about the silenced parts of history, you have to go inside the homes. And inside the homes, you come across many, many people who are not speaking out, because history being like, his story, the story that belongs to him, is written by men who are outside. And one of my books, The Silence of Shehrazad, is taking place during the Balkan Wars, First World War, and the Greek and Turkish war for the independence of Turkey. So in all those times, we know this story from our history books. And then whoever wants to write a more Orientalist story, a more exotic story that might sell abroad, like all the Turkish series, for example, the Magnificent Süleyman and stuff like that.
Very popular in
very
India.
Popular.
Very
I
popular.
know, very popular everywhere, and I never watched it. But they are all giving me the same story in different versions. Like, they're not different from what I read from the history book. So they're never talking about the silenced parts. They're always talking about, they're making the loud part louder.
Yeah.
So I wanted to go inside the houses, see the same history, let's say the history of the First World War, or maybe one day I write the history of the Suleiman times, I don't know. But what's happening to women there?
Yeah.
What's happening to the victorious Turk is out there, but what's happening to the same ethnic group of the defeated Greek who live still in Turkey? Like, what happens to them? Because we have something called minorities, and minorities don't go away once one army is defeated, and they suffer the most, and they want to keep their homes, but they're no longer regarded as the residents of that country, even though they've been living there, thousands of years. So those parts I wanted to bring out when I write a historical fiction, not, repeating the same old Suleiman story, but something more quiet, more gentle.
Yeah. And one of the things that I noticed was, and that's again, it's common in both your writing, is the role of mothers and they are not charming mothers. Most of them are not charming mothers. And so the women in your characters are very human, they are flawed, they are fierce, they can love, they can challenge.
They're raging women.
They are raging women, absolutely raging women. And in your writing, they are also, Shireen is an artist, Noor is a writer, but by the end of the novel, of course, she becomes a proper writer. And the women, the mothers in your fiction, I just loved the mothers. Of course, this particular story, My Mother Pattu, that's the title of the collection. And other mothers as well, the mother, the adopted mother. She, the way she brings up her daughter and the mother-daughter relationship, that's something which you really look into, almost with an X-ray vision. And so would you like to talk about that? Yeah, and then?
Okay, in that story is called Cartwheels on the Corridor. It's it's just, what I did was looked at the situation without sentimentality. The stories are not sentimental at all. In Malaysia, you have the situation where you adopt children, and very often they're Chinese babies, and then you pretend they're Indian. Wow. You know what I mean? And then you insist they're Indian. So like the girl says, there's not a single Indian thing about me, But the mom is so vehement about it. And then there are lots of problems because of this identity and this need to control and possess and manipulate and shape, someone else, which can only happen with great pain. And so a lot of that in the other story, the title story, My Mother Pattu, you have a woman who is so, again, this story was set in 1965, and the mother married when she was 13. So the child was just 14 years, younger, as it were, and the mother, as the child grew up, the mother became jealous of the child, which is very real in the sense that the mother never grew up, and could never be a mother. And I try to make it as authentic as possible, throwing away all the cobwebs of conventional stereotypes of how mothers ought to be. And because the whole idea was sometimes the abuser carries their own trauma, which you don't know, which affects generations after them. That was the idea. So they don't fit into happy or easy slots, because who does, Yeah.
Absolutely. So is there something in the immigrant experience that makes these women, of course, immigrant sensibility is, of course, there. The feeling of being disenfranchised is there. But, of course, covering it all is patriarchy, right? And, patriarchy is so overwhelmingly present in controlling women, fixing them in certain roles. Women feel betrayed, because of the expectations that society has of them.
Yeah, you're right. It's not so much patriarchy as a lack of agency. So you have Pattu, who could not study because the father said, no, you have grown up, you should stop studying when she was 13. Then you have another person who is an executive or maybe a manager, and her husband tells her, maybe you should stop working because I'm earning enough. And she realizes, I'm not working because because of the money. I'm working because I love it. And the question, or the woman whose husband adores her so much that he can't bear to let her go away to visit her own parents. And it's women without agency in the end, because they have to fight or push for whatever they want. And then they decide to fight and push for what they want. Sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't. But but all stories are about people taking charge, taking ownership of their own lives. They succeed, they may not succeed, but they pay the price. It's always paying the price for making your own decisions.
Yeah. Yes.
From there, it was a very good place where we arrived, and I wanted to add that this book, At the Breakfast Table, it starts with a quote. It's from a poem, which is written in Turkish. We translated it with my translator, and it goes something like that: "Where my mama left me, hold me tight. Where I have given up on love, set me right." This is by Metin Altıok, one of the poets who unfortunately has been massacred in 1993 during the burning of a hotel full of poets. So I wanted to also honor him. But I wanted to, this book turned out to be like all about mothers. I didn't intend. No, not at all. That wasn't in my mind. I was thinking about Black Sea Greeks, and then we ended up with the mothers. And my editor actually pointed that out to me. You said, this is a mother book. So I dedicated it to my mother. But it is, all the mothers here in the book are detached.
Yes.
They can't connect.
Yes.
Because they choose their work, they choose their art, they choose, and as if there is no middle line for a woman. Either you are going to devote yourself to your art or to your career and therefore be disconnected from your children, or you're not going to devote yourself anything other than your children. So they all fall into that trap of, okay, I'm choosing my art, but then I'm going to be disconnected. So until the last generation, or one of them, the very first one actually, it decides to devote herself to her new husband, therefore disconnects from her daughter. And so it starts like as a chain effect all the way to the final youngest generation who realizes that, no, like I can be both. I can be a mother and at the same time devote myself to my art, and that doesn't necessarily create a disconnection, which is, again, I think what patriarchy directs and forces us. Like, okay, you want to be a writer, you can't be a mom then. Who says? And if you can, then there will be always something missing. Why? You can be a very good writer because you're at home and you can raise your kids at the same time and be completely connected. So it's a little bit of, I realized that I was continuously going back and forth between this idea of devoting yourself to your art and at the same time being a mother.
And the women in the story are carrying a generational trauma, right? I don't want to reveal...
From the first mother, yes.
From the first mother. I don't want to reveal the secret. I'm sure, there'll be lots of readers here. So they are carrying that. And part of their disconnect is, I guess, also, this is how I read it as a reader, was also because, it was too large a burden to carry, and it's never spoken. It's really spoken, almost after, 70, 80 years. And Shireen in the novel, while, she might not be a very present mother, but she is a present grandmother. Noor is very close to her grandmother. So one generation, you jump one generation, and then, there is a bond that develops. And even Noor and Celine, again, two different generations, there is a bond. Of course, there is also this sexual competition between the two of them, but still, there is a bond. And but what I found very interesting that the women in the story, carry this, as I said, this large historical burden, and that burden is out there in the history of Turkey. But you've chosen women as people who carry this burden, considering that in wars, in actual wars, women do remain marginal in terms of agents. So was there anything you were trying to do with kind of, making women the center of this, as I said, this inheritance of history, even though they were not perhaps the actors? in that history?
Well, there are a few things to say here. First, the early 20th century, like we said, the end of Ottoman Empire, there has been a lot of massacres, genocides against the non-Muslim minorities of the Ottoman Empire, and Armenians paid a humongous price, Greeks too, and men usually were killed, but women. Sometimes more than men they survived and they found refuge in the houses of their neighbors. So they were raised hidden. Let's say the neighbor takes a Greek girl and because they're burning the village, and then they raise her with a Turkish identity. So there's more women who survived from the non-Muslim minorities, and therefore their identities, they carry the secret, and they know who they are. They remember what happened to their parents, to their village, and then they were forced to, like the Chinese girl, they were forced to say, you are Turkish, you are Muslim, whereas she knows, like, no, I was Greek, I went to the church, I remember the church, and in a way, I try to repeat that, like memory coming piece by piece, and you realize who you really are. But it's mostly girls, not boys. Boys are killed, but girls, they survive. So that's why they carry the secrets of the history.
Yeah. Thank you. It's wonderful. Saras, in two of your stories, and since we are talking about history and we are talking about trauma, two of your stories, are about amnesia, about dementia, so about forgetting. Did you have anything in mind when you wrote that? I mean,
yeah. I'm a terrible writer. It's just that I don't plan to write this thing. You just hear some fragments, you hear or you see something happening, and then that becomes a story. In all my stories, I planned something, and something else happens. Because the actors decide that you're just a channel for writing a story. Let us tell the story, So, so I was with this lady, and her grandchildren were painting her nails, and she was blushing. No, she was blushing because she was so excited that her nails were being painted, because in her mind she was 16. She wasn't married. And the grandchildren were singing this Tamil song, modern Tamil song, like, who's your husband? And that made her blush some more, And it was so touching, because here was this woman in her 70s who had never been to school, who was a widow, and everyone loved her, but she had dementia, and also she had Alzheimer's. She couldn't recognize anybody except, and she was living more and more in history. She could remember her brother, who had died maybe about 60 years before, when she was a child. She couldn't remember her children. So it was so touching. And she said, when they said, if they said, I'm your son, I'm your daughter, don't be silly, I'm not even married. And I had to put that in, I'm not, and she would sometimes get frightened and angry. There was a scene, not a spoiler, where she would see an old woman in the mirror and freak out. Who is this woman? Why are you following me? So, and she would weep and she would yell, get lost, because she'd be frightened. And these are real. All the stories here are fiction, but rooted in real life. Not necessarily my experience, but authentic lived experiences of somebody or other. So that was a thing. And how the family loves her, or love them, and how to deal with that trauma of losing the person whom you love,
And another thing, which is again very different writing, but a common theme at the breakfast table. Celine grows up, and she begins to understand her place in the world, and the secret is out. So there is a kind of acquired piece, once you've taken that history on board. And, and she is interested, I think she's a journalist, she wants to be a journalist, and yeah.
She wants to write songs.
She wants to write songs. So she is also an artist in the making. It's interesting. So you have Shireen, you have Noor, and you also have Celine. And in your story, there are two stories, and I think more than two, I don't remember, but there are two stories where, there are three friends, and all three of them are from, different communities. And even though the reality of Malaysia is different, as in the contemporary Malaysia, I assume from your stories and a little bit of reading that I've done, that there is still, it's not really racially necessarily equal, but they imagine that a better world is possible.
Because when you're young,
Yeah,
the
So
world
it's-
is yours,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So in that story, these three people, one Indian, one Chinese, one Malay, grow up best friends forever, and they thought they would be able to chart out their future and do what they want, except the reality meant that the Malay girl would get a scholarship automatically because of her race and religion, and the Chinese boy would, his father would send him overseas to be educated because he's wealthy enough, and the Indian boy who is looked after by his mom doesn't have the means, and despite the fact that he has got better grades than the girl or the boy, he would have to take whatever came his way, and that was a reality check. Yeah.
So in both your works, I find that even though tragedy has struck and very, very difficult times have been gone through by the characters, but the stories are still with hope. They offer hope. And,
Resilience.
yeah, there is
Absolutely.
resilience. There is hope. It's not cynical. Your writing is not cynical. Neither is your writing cynical, and that's wonderful. As readers, and I guess as politics, we all need to believe that we can make a better world. Especially now, I think that belief has to be reaffirmed everywhere.
Yeah,
Can I say-
yeah. I want to finish my books having everybody finding a little bit of freedom. That's like, if it's like my punctuation, like the last dot that I put, like if they don't find a little bit of freedom, a little bit of transformation, that they see the world themselves, then if they haven't changed a bit, I kind of feel like the book hasn't finished. So I try to draw everybody there. And if there is flexibility, if there is adaptation, if there is change, if there is room for freedom, understanding, embracing the other, if the characters change that way, the book automatically ends with a note of hope. And that's my style, I guess.
Yeah. And
Okay, mine is not like that. More like calling it by its name, and it's looking at what's real. You see, in Malaysia, because of the politics of identity and race and thing, we like happy stories. We like people living very happily together, and we all love each other, and that's a narrative that's very comfortable and conventional to the government, to the societies. I remember one of the stories, it went in for a local competition, and two of the judges were horrified. They gave me the bottommost marks, according to the organizer, because it was not conventionally happy and proper. But I'm not a fighter in the sense that I don't want to bash people. I just want to call it out by its name and say, recognize it for what it is, then you move. Don't pretend, and don't cover it with hypocrisy and say this is whatever. Call it out by its name. I think we have to be honest. Otherwise, how can we face history and then walk into the future,
Absolutely. I would now request, both of you to just maybe read out some portions, yeah, and then we'll,
Which book do you want me to read?
at the breakfast
Okay.
table, yeah. So, How are we doing for time? Are we doing okay?
I think so.
So maybe 3-4 minutes each, and then.
Okay. In my mother Patu, that story, Patu is a mother and Lalita, the daughter, is going for a show, The Sound of Music. Patu doesn't live with the daughter. She just visits. Maybe I should read the first paragraph, and then I'll read about the incident where the daughter wants to go for Sound of Music. The first paragraph tells you what the setup is. My mother Patu graced our lives largely with her absence, for which my father and I, and to a lesser extent grandma, were profoundly grateful. She descended upon us once a month to collect her allowance from grandma, loot the pantry, curse my father, and cuff me on the ear. We breathed a collective sigh of relief when she went away, except for grandma, who wept in secret for the daughter she could not stand to live with. Okay, that's their relationship. So now Lalita is getting dressed to go for a show, and the mother has chosen that day to come visit. All right? Perhaps I could hide in the room until Patu left, I thought. I could still catch the movie another day. I looked in the mirror again and saw my face mutating into my grandma's. Even as I did that, a strange sensation, blazing white with cold ferocity, swept over me. We'll see if she dares to go, Patu was saying softly as I came downstairs. When I'm done with that Missy, I'm going. There, I said it, though my voice wobbled a bit. Ho, the worm turns. Patu looked me up and down. Look at that skirt, so short you can see her ass. Why bother it, huh? In a second, she was in front of me. Her hand grabbed my skirt. There was a ripping sound. She raised her hand again. My hands caught it in midair, and I pushed her away. Her other hand swung up and yanked my hair hard. I felt no pain, nothing but that white, cold anger that coursed through my body. I sensed rather than saw Auntie Jansi and Auntie Leela pulling a cursing, shrieking Patu away and sticking her on a chair. Have you gone mad, Patu? Auntie Jansi. I sensed Grandma wailing, Ayo, 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 hitting her head with her hands. I sensed it in slow motion, like someone in a fog, for my vision wasn't very clear at once. I knew, though, what I wanted to do. I took my father's walking stick, and I stood above Patu, and I raised it high with both hands. I did not say a word, but there were noises growling at my throat. Grandma flung herself as Patu shouted at Patu and shouted, "No, Lalita!" The stick remained in my hands. Don't become like her. The stick was stuck to my hands. I could not lower it. Patu's voice in the background. She wants to hit me. I'll kill her. And Auntie Jansi, shut up, Patu. You're not Patu. You understand, Lali, Grandma said. What's the matter with you, Grandma asked Patu. You want to kill your own daughter? I'm not her daughter, I said, rubbing my head. No, you're just a bloody whore who took away my life. You and your father. Grandma said, Patu, not this again. Ho, I say, ho. Patu used Tevadiye, a Tamil word for ho that was unspeakable. A word that once uttered meant there was no going back for speaker and listener.
So I'll read a piece from At the Breakfast Table, which you have available now in Bengali. Yes, yes, translated, so you can read it also in Bengali. This is my generation, let's say, the third generation. Noor is at their summer house in Büyükada, where I grew up, outside of Istanbul. in Turkey. It's a holiday and the whole family is together, but she woke up late, so she's all alone in the breakfast table and thinking. The emptiness my mother left behind. The real emptiness was in the living room in Maçka in Istanbul, in that vast room, big enough to ride a horse through. This was not a metaphorical emptiness, but a material one. Just as at the scene of a crime, investigators sketch an outline of the victim in chalk, so on the floor of our family living room lay a white, long-haired sheepskin rug encircled by empty bottles of alcohol. Fikret, my brother, found our mother lying unconscious in the middle of them. He scooped her up and took her to hospital. My mother, who had vowed never again and had not touched a drop of 7 years, was lying on the white sheepskin surrounded by bottles. There is where she put her head, between the whiskey and the vodka. Her hair was a mess, all tangled up with the bottles. At her fingertips were the expensive wines, and between her legs were the champagne bottles. Mom wouldn't touch rakı or beer, and I didn't think she liked gin either. But there, to the left of her neck, was an empty gin bottle, along with bottle of whiskey, vodka, and cognac. After 7 years of abstinence, in her excitement at rediscovering them, she had guzzled them all. When I returned from my spring break, I stood in the living room with that huge rucksack on my back, gazing at the emptiness left by my unconscious mother, at the bottles with their tops off, at the sheepskin matted with split cognac and sticky patches of whiskey on the parquet floor. Their smells mingled together. She had died much earlier and was now waiting at the morgue in a closed coffin. She took her last breath 5:28 a.m. The only person with her at the hospital was my brother, Fikret. He had woken up at midnight to the crying of Oğuz, who was just a few months old at the time. "You go, please," Freya murmured. "I just fed him." Fikret picked up Oğuz, shushed him, and took him downstairs. From the window of their uncurtained living room, he looked across the squatters' neighborhood. A few of the houses had a single light bulb burning. In other windows, the blue light from a TV was reflected. Then, tick, the electricity went off and the hill went dark. For a brief while, Laika, Freya's Russian Samoyed, barked intermittently, and then a deep silence settled over everywhere. Baby Oğuz's eyes were open, but he wasn't crying. It was as if he, too, were watching the darkness, listening to the silence. Fikret is quite vague about what happened next. He handed Oğuz to Freya, left the house, got in his green Fiat Tempra, which was parked at the foot of the hill, and drove through the dark, empty streets. The electricity was out in all of Levent, on Nispetiye Street, in Zincirlikuyu, and all the way to Gayrettepe. His mind was absolutely clear, but it was as if some higher power was guiding him. In Maçka, the street lights were on. They were on in the living room of our fourth-floor apartment, too, illuminating the large, ugly, but comfortable black leather sofas and chairs, and Dad's high-tech music system. Beneath the hissing halogen lamps in each of the four corners, the mirrors and cut crystal decanters and matching glasses sparkled in all 7 colors of the spectrum. The only thing not sparkling were my mother's half-open eyes. Thank you.
Any questions? Yes.
Thank you, KLM, and thank you both of the speakers. Hello. Thank you, KLM, and thank you both of the speakers. So my question will be like, when we read history, like we have read about from a lot of authors, like we find that the voices have always been suppressed. Like when you guys try to write a book, like there are inhibitions. Don't put this part. Don't let people read about this. So is that prevalent now as well? Like have you faced any inhibitions while trying to write certain points? Like people saying, no, this doesn't happen anymore. Let's not talk about that. Let's not reveal this has happened in our country. But if that has happened, like we need to know about it. So my question is, do you have to omit some of the parts for any reasons like that, which we don't get access to?
Yeah.
No, if anybody tells me you have to omit these pieces, I will insist, unless it's like there was one scene in the book that it's coming out this year that my editor said this is too much. It's too much that it's going to make all the other things too light, whereas the other things are actually quite violent. So let's remove one violent scene to make the other ones become more effective. So like for editorial reasons, yes, but for political reasons or for fear or because somebody says this will, this will put your head in trouble, no, I go stubbornly and have them there. Like not because I'm stubborn, if it is working in the plot, if it is saying, if it's part of the whole story, and they ask me to remove it because it might, I might be in trouble because of that, then I don't. But if it's, it's not really adding anything to the plot, if it's from the literary reasons, then I would definitely think about it.
I'm kind of a sloth. So, but one of the things that I had to learn, and really learn is a hard thing, is to be brave. Because if you're not brave, and if you only write nice, happy things, you're not a writer. Not the kind of writer that I wanted to be. So yeah, I had to learn courage, but it had to be done in order to say I'm writing stories that I can say are mine. Just courage, not that easy, because we live in a community where people tell you to behave in a certain way so as not to, make others unhappy, not to embarrass your family, your father.
Hi, this is for Saras ma'am. You just mentioned a very interesting tidbit about how Malaysian women, Malaysian families adopt Chinese children and then try to pass them off as Indian. That was very, very interesting for me because I thought it would have been the opposite way around, that, passing off Indian children as Chinese. But this is the opposite. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that, ma'am, that why this phenomenon?
It doesn't happen nowadays, but back in the, like in the 60s, 70s, a lot of, you see, the setup is that when you have a lot of children, Chinese families, poor Chinese families would give away their children. They would give away daughters, not sons. Sons go for a good price if you have to, give up sons. Daughters, you could give anything, So a lot of Indians, and also because there's an Indian thing, color. We're big on color, aren't we, Yes. So, yeah, they wouldn't want an Indian baby. They would want a Chinese baby, who is fairer. So, yeah, it's our own hypocrisy. So then you have a Chinese baby. And then because you live in an Indian community, you proceed to make her as Indian as possible. Yeah.
Anyone else? Anyone else? You? Yes.
My question is to Saras ma'am. Ma'am, I'm not familiar with your work. Today is the first time I've heard about it. But you spoke about writing about unsentimental women. And I always feel that sweetness is somehow the burden placed on women, that women have to be sweet in a certain way. So, like in case of my mother, like she's also very fierce, not known to be very sweet at all. So what do these unsentimental women mean to you? Thank you.
No, it's a little bit. The stories are not sentimental. You know, the women who are who we are, complicated, complex, sometimes nice, sometimes horrid. The stories are not sentimental. Neither do they go on this path of victimization. Why me? You know, or I'm suffering. Because when you have racial discrimination, it's so easy to say, "Oh, I'm suffering." You know, no one gives me a chance. I didn't want to go along that path. I wanted to show resilience. I think that is the underlying theme. And to show resilience, I couldn't do sentimental. I just did authentic. So that actually a lot of people said, you're talking about me, or talking about my mother. And one boy in Bronx said, you're talking about my mother. You know? So it's just, I didn't want to go whinging about how unfair life is. It's just like, it's such a tired thing, you know? And I couldn't do that.
Thank you.
Okay. So with this, we come to an end. And please do go and get a copy of My Mother
amazing.
Pattu and Defne's books. I highly, highly recommend them. And do get them signed. I've got my book signed. And thank you so much. It was such a pleasure and such an honor to be here with two very brave women. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
much.